Listen, K-fam. The car went off the bridge in the storm. They never found her body. Vanessa Cole Han, a black woman, a specialist in rare manuscripts, historical cryptography, and document restoration. For years, she ran the private archive of the Han family. She wore conservation gloves to touch old paper. She trusted the man she married. Her husband is Han Tae-won. They call him the Silent Dragon. A black Korean dragon tattoo runs down the left side of his neck, from under the ear into his collar. Tailored black suit, Swiss watch. A wedding band he never takes off. Then the numbers stopped adding up. Phantom payments from a port subsidiary. And suddenly the leaked files carried her credentials. An account appeared in her name. The betrayal was built for her to wear. Tae-won believed it. He suspended her access. He threw her out of the Han residence. She walked out with one bag and an old copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. That same night, a message told her to meet a driver. The driver changed the route. Minutes before the car fell, he vanished. IU. 3 years later, a woman named Nora Bennett walks back into a Boston library. She reaches for a second copy of that same book, and another hand reaches for the same cover. Somebody wanted these two in the same room. K-fam, I need you to see what happens next. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. Vanessa Cole Han's finger stopped on a number that should not exist. Third screen from the left, row 41, a payment of $412,000 routed through the port subsidiary to a vendor whose name was 3 consonants and a registration code. She scrolled up. She scrolled down. The same vendor appeared 6 times across 4 months, and every single time the invoice attached was blank. No line items, no signature, just a PDF the size of a photograph of nothing. She did not blink for a long time. The office around her had emptied hours ago. The audit floor of the Han conglomerate sat on the 32nd level, glass on 3 sides, and at 9 at night, the city was a spill of gold behind her reflection. Vanessa was the one they'd brought in when the internal numbers stopped agreeing with each other. Forensic reconstruction. She found what people buried, and she found it in the places people were sure nobody looked. The offsetting entry, the reversal that reversed nothing, the vendor that lived only on paper. She pulled row 41 into a new sheet, then row 88. Then a cluster near the bottom of the marine logistics ledger, all of it feeding the same 3-consonant ghost. IGO. The pattern was clean, the way a lie is clean when a professional tells it. Too smooth, too balanced, every quarter closing to 0, as if nobody had ever moved a cent. But the cash had moved. The cash always moves somewhere. She reached for her coffee. Cold. She drank it anyway. Vanessa had a rule for nights like this, and the rule was, you do not name it out loud until the money names itself. So she stayed quiet. She built the map. Vendor to bank, bank to holding shell, shell to a second port the conglomerate had supposedly decommissioned 2 years ago. Container Terminal 9, marked closed, still paying invoices. Her left eyebrow had a habit. It twitched when she was lying, and it twitched, too, when the truth arrived before she was ready for it. It twitched now. She saved the file. She saved it again, to the encrypted drive, the one that lived behind 2 passwords and a key nobody had but her. The elevator chimed down the hall. She stood. Nobody came up to 32 at this hour except the cleaning crew, and the cleaning crew came at 11. She checked her watch, a thin gold thing, a gift, 10 years married, and he still remembered she liked things that didn't shout. 9:40. She waited for footsteps. None came. The elevator had opened for no one, or for someone who already knew how to move quietly. She sat back down. She kept working. That was the other rule. The vendor with the three-consonant name had a bank in Busan and a second in an island jurisdiction, and between the two, the money did a thing Vanessa had seen exactly twice before in her career, both times in cases that ended with somebody in handcuffs. It went out as a loan. It came back as a repayment. The loan was never a loan, and the repayment repaid a debt that had never been owed, and in the gap between the two, the tiny accounting seam where a real firm would show interest and a fake one showed nothing, $19 million simply stopped being anybody's. She flagged the seam in red. She built a second sheet showing the seam 19 times. Then she did the thing that would matter later, though she couldn't know it yet. She time-stamped everything. Every screen, every export, every reconstruction, stamped with the hour and locked to the master clock, so that anyone reading it would see the truth in the order it had actually happened. Fraud found on the night of the 9th, at 11:04, by an auditor, doing exactly what an auditor is paid to do. Her phone buzzed on the glass. A colleague from tax, 2 floors up, still in the building. "You good?" the message read. "Compliance was asking about your logins." Vanessa read it 3 times. She typed back, "Ask who's asking." She watched the little dots rise and fall and stop. No answer came. She set the phone face down and felt the first cold thread of something she would not name, because naming it broke the rule. Instead, she opened Terminal 9's file one more time, the digital shadow of it, at least, the manifest records that survived the port's supposed shutdown. Containers still moved through a dead terminal. Somebody was still paying longshoremen who officially had no work. Somebody was still insuring cargo that officially didn't exist. She wrote it down. She wrote all of it down, and the writing down was the trap closing, and she was the one holding the pen. By the time she'd reconstructed the full chain, it was past 11, and what she had was ugly. 41 payments, $19 million. All of it routed through a subsidiary her husband's company owned on paper, but had told its own board it had shut. Someone inside the Han Group was running money through a dead port and dressing it as freight. She did not yet know that someone had been watching her build the exact map that would hang around her own neck. Vanessa arrived home at midnight, to a house that ran on silence the way other houses ran on electricity. The Han residence sat above the water on the north edge of the city. Cold stone, warm rooms, a wife who'd learned the shape of her husband's moods, the way sailors learn weather. She keyed in the code. The alarm chirped its 2 soft notes. She hung the long black wool coat by the door, set the wine-colored scarf on the hook beneath it, and stood a second in the dark of the entry to hear whether he was home. He was home. She could tell from the study, a single lamp under the door, and the smell of the tea he drank when he wasn't sleeping. Han Tae-won did not sleep the way ordinary men slept. He rested the way a blade rests, flat, ready, one eye on the door. 40 years old and built like the covers of the magazines that would never get to photograph him. The dragon inked down the left of his neck, disappearing under a black collar he never fully closed. They called him the Silent Dragon, because in 20 years, no one had ever heard him raise his voice to make a threat. He didn't need to. The silence was the threat. She almost went to him. She almost carried the whole 19 million into that lamplit room and set it on his desk and said, "Someone in your house is stealing, and I think they want you to take the fall." She took one step toward the study. The wood floor gave its familiar small complaint under her heel. Behind that door was the man who'd married her against the wishes of every gray-haired advisor in the family. The man who wore a wedding band he never removed even in the shower, even in the water. 10 years of a marriage nobody had bet on, and everybody had watched, waiting for the day the black wife would cost the dragon his kingdom. She had spent those 10 years proving them wrong with her silence and her work. She stopped with her hand on the banister. There was a rule for that, too, and she had made it herself. You do not accuse a man's own blood until you can prove which hand held the knife, and she could not, yet, prove whose hand it was. So she climbed the stairs. She would tell him when the map was finished. Tomorrow, the day after. She would not get the chance. The next morning her badge died at the archive door. The physical archive lived 2 floors below the audit floor, behind a steel door and a reader that had accepted her thumb every day for 4 months. Original contracts. Wet ink signatures. The port concession papers that predated the digital system, the only place the dead terminal's real ownership history existed on paper. She'd meant to pull the Terminal 9 concession file at 8 sharp. The reader flashed red, then it flashed red again. A third time, and the little screen printed a line she'd never seen it print. Access revoked. Contact compliance. She stepped back. She looked at the badge like the badge had lied to her. She pressed her thumb to the reader a 4th time, slower, as if slowness could argue with a machine. Red. The little screen kept its verdict and blinked it at her, patient and stupid and final. Down the corridor, a man was already walking toward her, unhurried, hands loose at his sides, and she knew the walk before she knew the face. Kwon Il-sung. 52. Gray at the temples, the kind of man who wore an antique cufflink to a knife fight, and won because everyone was busy admiring the cufflink. He ran compliance. He'd run it for longer than she'd been alive to the family, and he smiled at her now, the way you smile at weather you predicted. Vanessa, he said her name like a small kindness. You look tired. My access is off. He glanced at the reader as if it were news to him. There's a review. Routine. Anything touching the port entities is frozen until it clears. I run the port audit, Il-sung. You ran it. He let the tense sit there, gentle, deliberate. Compliance took it back this morning. Board request. He held out a hand, palm up. Patient. The badge, please. You'll get a new one when the review closes. She did not give him the badge. Which board member? She said. Does it matter? It matters to me. His small dark eyes moved over her face, reading the eyebrow, reading everything. You've been in the marine logistics ledgers late, he said. Not a question. Alone. After hours. Downloading. The floor tilted a half-degree under her feet. She kept her face still. That's my job. Your job. He tasted the words. Your job is to review what the family gives you to review, not to build private files on an encrypted drive at 11 at night. He tilted his head a half-inch. You'd be surprised how much a review can see. There it was. He knew about the drive. He'd known before she'd walked to this door. The map she'd built in the dark had never been hers alone. Someone had been reading over her shoulder the whole time, and the someone was standing in front of her now, smiling like a man who'd already won, and was only waiting for her to notice. I found something, Vanessa said. Level. Quiet. 19 million. Out of a port you told the board was closed. I can show you tonight. Something crossed Kwon's face. Not surprise, not fear. Satisfaction. The look of a fisherman who feels the line go taut exactly where he set it. I'm sure you can, he said softly. I'm sure you can show a great many things. That's rather the problem, isn't it? I'd ask you not to open those files again. For your own sake. He said, for your own sake, the way another man would say, I own the ground you're standing on. Then he took the badge out of her hand. She never felt her fingers loosen, but they had, and slid it into his breast pocket, and walked away without hurry, because men who own the ground never hurry. She stood at the dead door and did the only thing she could think to do. She went back upstairs to the encrypted drive. The encrypted drive was empty, not wiped, worse than wiped. In its place sat a single folder she had never made, and the folder had her name on it, and inside the folder were documents she had never seen and would spend the rest of her life wishing she'd never opened. Bank statements. An account at an island bank whose name she couldn't pronounce, opened 14 months ago in the name Vanessa Colehan, funded in installments that matched, to the dollar, to the day, the 19 million she had spent the night before, tracing out of the dead port. There was her passport number, her signature, or a signature so close to hers that her own hand would have hesitated to deny it. There were emails, dated across a year, in her writing, in her tone, approving the very phantom invoices she had flagged. There was a wire confirmation with her credentials stamped across the top. Somebody had not hidden the money from her. Somebody had hidden it behind her. Her hands went cold first, then the back of her neck. She scrolled, and the story assembled itself with a craftsman's patience. Every hole she would have poked, pre-filled, every alibi she might have raised, pre-answered. Whoever built this had watched how she worked, had known she'd trace the vendor to the shell, to the dead terminal, and had made sure that at the end of the trail, when someone finally pulled it, the last name standing in the light would be hers. She checked the account's opening date against her own calendar, the one that lived in her head from 10 years of a marriage run on schedules. 14 months ago. The week Taewon had flown to Singapore, and she had stayed home with a fever, alone in the stone house, no alibi but an empty bed and a bottle of medicine. The forger had picked the 1 week she couldn't prove where she'd been. Daebak. Whoever built this had not guessed. Whoever built this had known her life like a floor plan. She opened the fake emails and read her own voice lying. That was the part that turned her stomach. Not the numbers, the voice. The cadence was hers. The little tick of ending a request with, "when you have a moment." The way she signed off short on Fridays. Someone had studied her, the way she studied ledgers. Patient and unhurried, learning the grain of her, until they could carve a version of her that no stranger would ever call fake. 19 million, her name on the account, her credentials on the wires, her access to the one physical file that could have proven the concession was forged, revoked an hour ago by a man with a cufflink. The leak was already moving. She could feel it the way you feel a room go quiet behind you. Somewhere below her, in a conference room she'd never be invited to, the story was being told. The forensic auditor was the thief. The wife had been robbing the family from the inside. And look, here's the proof. In her own hand, at her own bank. She tried to think the way the family thought, because that was the only defense she had left. What did 19 million buy that was worth framing the woman who slept in the founder's bed? Not the money was the bait. The frame bought something bigger. It bought a reason. A conglomerate does not swallow a rival, does not push through a merger the board is fighting, unless the numbers force the board's hand. And a thief in the executive family, caught and quietly removed, was exactly the kind of scandal a man used to say, "See, we need to consolidate. We need the merger. We need one strong hand." Vanessa wasn't the target. Vanessa was the excuse. She hated how clean it was. Aish. It was the same cleanliness she'd admired in the ledgers 8 hours ago, and now she was standing inside it. She opened her personal phone. 2 messages from numbers she didn't know, 1 from a business reporter she did know, 3 words, "Care to comment?" The story wasn't coming. The story was here. And the man she had almost told last night, the man asleep down the hall behind a lamp and a locked door, was the man they would tell it to first. She thought of the blank study lamp. She thought of the tea he drank when he couldn't sleep. She thought, with a clarity that scared her more than the numbers, that she had one clean truth in the entire building, and it lived inside her own head, and every piece of paper in the world now said the opposite. Vanessa Colehan sat very still at a desk that was no longer hers. For one breath, she let herself picture the other version, the version where she walked down the hall right now, into the study with the lamp, and put the card on his desk, and said his name. Taewon, look, someone is doing this to both of us. 10 years. Surely 10 years bought 1 hour of a man's belief. Surely the boy who had slid a copy of Monte Cristo across a library table at her, all those years ago, still lived somewhere under the black suit and the dragon on his neck. Then she pictured his face reading the emails in her voice, the signatures that were almost hers. The account opened the week she'd had no alibi. She pictured him doing the one thing he was famous for, going silent, and she understood that his silence, the silence the whole city feared, would this time be aimed at her, and there would be no wall on earth she could climb over it. Belief was a thing you couldn't audit. That was the trouble. Then she started copying. Whatever they'd left of her real work, the reconstruction, the map from vendor to shell to Terminal 9, the timestamps that proved she'd found the fraud, not fed it. She pulled it onto the only thing they couldn't reach through the network. A cheap external card, the kind you buy at a pharmacy, small enough to swallow. Her fingers moved and her eyebrow twitched, and downstairs, 2 floors down, the steel door she could no longer open kept its one honest file in the dark. She worked fast, because fast was all she had. The timestamps were the whole game now. A fabricated account could be built in a month by a patient forger, but it couldn't rewrite the master clock, and the master clock said she'd flagged the fraud at 11:04, hours before anyone had accused her of anything. That gap was her only witness. She copied the clock logs. She copied the red-flagged seams, all 19. She copied the Terminal 9 manifest, the ghost containers, the longshoremen paid for work at a dead port. If they took her name, her house, her marriage, they would not take the 1 hour of truth she'd stamped into the record before the trap sprang. The card filled, 88%, 90. She pulled up the concession summary one more time and saw, near the bottom, a name she'd skimmed past the night before because it had meant nothing then. The original port papers had a signatory, a man named Arthur Bell. She copied that too, not knowing why, only knowing that a name she didn't recognize on a file everyone wanted buried was worth carrying out of the building. 92%, 94. Behind her, the elevator chimed again, the same soft 2 notes that had opened for no one the night before. This time, it did not open for no one. 2 men stepped out of the elevator, and neither of them looked at her face. They looked at her hands, at the desk, at the drawer already half open. The taller one wore an earpiece and a suit cut too clean for a Tuesday, and he did the thing security men do when they want a room to understand who owns it. He simply stood in the doorway and let his shoulders fill it. Vanessa's thumb pressed the memory card the last 2 millimeters into the seam of her palm. "Ma'am," the shorter one said, "Mr. Kwan asked us to escort you down." Down, not out, down like a temperature. She slid the drawer shut with her hip because both her hands were busy, one holding the card, one holding a pen she did not need, and she smiled the way she smiled at auditors who lied to her for a living. "I know the way to the lobby," she said. "He asked us to escort you." She let them. That was the trick nobody taught you in forensic school. When the floor tilts, you do not brace. You move with it, and you count. She counted the steps to the elevator, counted the floors as the numbers fell, counted the seconds the taller man spent studying her reflection in the brushed steel doors. 32 down to lobby, long enough to slide the card from her palm into the lining of her coat, through the small tear she had opened that morning with a nail file. It vanished into the wool like a coin into water. The doors opened on marble. Han Group lobby, 4 stories of it, a company that told the city it had nothing to hide by building walls out of glass. Her car was not at the curb. Her driver was not at the curb. There was a black sedan she did not recognize, and a man beside it who opened the rear door before she reached it, and that was how she knew the day had already been decided somewhere above her head in a room she was not allowed into anymore. Home, the man said. Not a question. Somebody had told him where she lived. She got in. What else did the floor leave her? The security men watched the sedan pull off the curb, and one of them lifted a phone to his ear and said 3 words. And 32 floors above them, a man in antique cufflinks set down his coffee and smiled at nothing. Kwon Il-sung did not gloat. Gloating was for people who were not certain. He simply crossed one item off a list he kept in his head, the way he had crossed off Arthur Bell 3 years before, and moved his attention to Thursday. In the sedan, Vanessa put her forehead against the cold window and did the only useful thing left to her. She rehearsed. Not what she would beg, she did not beg, but what she would say, in what order, to the one man in the world who had 10 years of reasons to believe her. She had the memory card in her coat. She had the truth. Surely truth, laid out clean, one number at a time, the way she laid out everything, would be enough for a man who had married her, partly because she never once flinched from a hard number. She would learn, in about 40 minutes, that a hard number is only worth what the person hearing it needs it to be. The residents sat over the water like a promise the tide kept rewriting, and the gate opened before the car touched it. Someone inside was watching the drive. Vanessa climbed the steps she had climbed for 10 years, past the stone urns Taewon's mother had hated, past the door that cost more than her first apartment, and the housekeeper was not there to take her coat. That was the first wrong thing. In 10 years, the housekeeper was always there. The second wrong thing was the light. Every lamp in the front hall was on, at 4 in the afternoon, as if the house were bracing for a photograph. And the third wrong thing was standing at the far end of the hall with his back to her, one hand flat on the console table, the dragon that ran down the left side of his neck half swallowed by his collar. Taewon. He turned. And for 1 second, his face was the face from the library years ago, the one that slid a book across a table, because he did not have the words yet. Then it closed. She watched it close, the way you watch a door swing on a slow hinge, and she knew before he opened his mouth that he had read the file. "There's a bag," he said, "upstairs." Soo-jin packed it. His sister had been in her closet. "You want to tell me what they showed you," Vanessa said, "or you want to skip to the part where you already believe it?" The left corner of his jaw moved. He walked to the window instead of answering, and the water beyond it was doing that flat gray thing it did before weather. $19 million, he said. "An account in your name, opened 14 months ago. Emails. Your signature. Forged. Your credentials. Stolen." She did not raise her voice. Raising it would have been the sound of someone who was afraid, and she was afraid, so she made the words come out level and slow. "Taewon. Look at me. You have looked at me across a table for 10 years. Look at me and tell me you think I built a fake vendor with 3 consonants in its name and paid myself through a port your own company said was closed." He looked. He looked for a long time. And the terrible thing, the thing that put the first real crack in her chest, was that she saw him want to believe her. She saw it fight up into his eyes and get held there, behind whatever Kwon had put in his hands that afternoon. "The board meets Thursday," he said quietly. "About the merger, if my wife is under investigation for laundering 19 million through Han assets, the vote, there it is. The vote collapses. Everything my father built, everything." He turned from the window. "I can't have you in this house while the compliance office is building a case. My lawyers say—" "Your lawyers." She laughed, and it came out sharp and bright and wrong for the room. "I go. Your lawyers. 10 years and I get lawyers." "Vanessa." "Say it plain. You're a man who says everything plain, except the one thing that matters. Say it." His hand closed on the back of a chair. The wedding band caught the lamplight, the band he had never once taken off. Not swimming, not surgery, not the night his mother died. You need to leave the residence, he said. Tonight. There it was, plain. She took the memory card out of her coat then. She had not meant to. The plan had been to hold it, to keep the truth for a room with a lawyer in it, a room she still believed she would get. But he was standing there being plain, and something in her needed him to be wrong out loud, so she held it up between two fingers where he could see it. There's a payment, she said. $412,000. First of 41. It ran through a terminal. Your company swore it shut down 2 years ago. I have the timestamps. I found it at 4 minutes past 11 the night before last, and somebody was in the archive erasing my access before I finished my coffee the next morning. That is not a woman covering her theft, Taewon. That is a woman who was fast, and got caught being fast, by people who needed a name to hang it on. For a moment, she would hold this moment for months, turn it over, hate it. He looked at the card the way a starving man looks at a plate through glass. Then give it to compliance, he said. Kwon is compliance. Then give it to me. And there it was, the whole marriage in one sentence, and she heard it for what it was. Give it to me. Let me decide what it means. Let me hold the truth in my hands, the way I hold everything, and you stand very still and trust that I am a good man. She closed her fist around the card. No, she said softly, I don't think I will. Her left eyebrow did not twitch. She noticed that, distantly, the way you notice a door that finally stops squeaking. She was not lying, and she was not hiding fear. For the first time in 2 days, she was doing neither. She did not scream. She had watched 100 people scream in 100 audit rooms, and none of them ever changed a number by screaming. She went upstairs. The bag was on the bed, zipped, packed by a woman who folded blouses like they were being filed. On the dresser sat the things Soo-jin had decided a fleeing wife was allowed to keep. A passport, a phone charger, $300 in cash, and, because someone in this family still had a heart, or because someone wanted her sentimental and slow, the book. The Count of Monte Cristo, their copy, the incomplete one, the one missing its last signature of pages, the one Taewon had slid across the library table the night she understood she was going to marry him. Half a book, a story about a man buried alive who comes back with another name. She held it a second too long. Then she put it in the bag on top of the folded blouses, and she zipped it, and she carried it down past her husband, who stood in the front hall with his hands at his sides like a man at a funeral for something he had killed himself. The car will take you wherever you want, he said. Don't send your car. Vanessa, you already sent it once today. She opened the door herself. Cold came in off the water. I'll drive. Her own car was in the garage, the small one she used when she wanted to be nobody, and Taewon did not stop her. And that would be the thing he replayed for months, that he stood in a bright hall and let the door close and did not follow her down the steps. She backed out. The gate opened. In the mirror, the house blazed with all its lamps, a lighthouse for a ship it had just pushed off the rocks. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She was on the coast road before she looked at it, and only because it buzzed 3 times, and 3 was the number that meant work, that meant somebody who couldn't wait. The screen showed a name that made no sense. Her driver, the real one, the one who had not been at the curb. Bridge on the northern route is closed. Accident. Take the old span at Marrow Point. I'm sorry about today. Jay. She knew Marrow Point. Old 2-lane thing, iron and rust, the kind of bridge the city kept meaning to condemn. It added 20 minutes. But the northern route ran past the Han offices, past the reporters who had started calling, and 20 minutes of dark water sounded better than one photograph. She turned inland at the split. She did not think about the fact that her driver never signed a text. She did not think about it, and that was the last easy mistake she would make for a long time. The rain started as the road climbed. Not weather she'd invited. The flat gray had finally broken. Her wipers pushed it around. The book sat on the seat beside her where she'd moved it, spine up, and she reached over once at a red light and pressed her palm flat on its cover, the way a person touches a shoulder. Marrow Point came up out of the dark, 2 lamps working out of 6, the iron rails wet and black. She slowed at the mouth of it. Something in her, the part that reconstructed things for a living, the part that read a ledger and knew when a number was lying, pulled taut. There was a car already on the bridge, stopped, sideways, hazards blinking slow. She braked. Headlights came up fast behind her. She had a half-second to understand 2 things at once: that the car ahead was not broken down, it was placed, and that the car behind was not going to stop. Then the impact took her, not a crash, a shove, precise, low on the rear quarter panel, the way you nudge a thing you want to go a specific direction. The small car spun. The wet iron gave her nothing. The rail took the driver's door and folded around it and screamed, and then the rail was gone, and the world tilted the way the floor had tilted that afternoon, and she remembered. She actually remembered. In the long second the car hung over black water, the trick. When the floor tilts, you do not brace. You move with it. She grabbed the book. The window was already broken. She did not remember it breaking. Cold flooded the cabin, real cold, the kind with weight, and the car went down nose first, and the belt held her against the seat, like a hand pinning a butterfly. She got the belt off underwater. She would never be able to explain how. The book was in her left fist, and she would not open the fist even to swim. And later, she would think that was the most Vanessa thing she had ever done, drowning, and refusing to let go of half a story. The current took her sideways, away from the lights, under the span, into dark that had no top and no bottom. Her lungs turned to fists. Somewhere in the sinking cabin the memory card was gone, torn from her coat lining by the water, or still stitched into the wool that was now trying to drown her. She could not tell, and could not spare the thought. She had made a copy that morning of the copy. She had thought that was paranoia. Drowning, she understood it had been the smartest thing she'd done in 10 years. Her fist stayed closed on the book, and the last thing she saw before the water closed the door was 2 men on the bridge above, leaning over the broken rail, watching the place where she had gone under, not diving, not shouting, just watching, the way you watch a number settle into a column where you filed it. Then nothing, then more nothing. Then, so far off it might have been a memory, a light on the water that was not the bridge. The men on the bridge waited 8 minutes. That was the number they'd been given. 8 minutes. Then leave. Then the river does the rest. Then no body means an inquest that runs for a year, and a widower who cannot bury what he cannot find. One of them said something the other didn't answer. They got in the sideways car, straightened it, drove off the old span, and the bridge went back to being empty iron in the rain. They did not see the woman in the small aluminum boat. Miriam Caldwell had been on the water since dusk, which was a thing nobody who knew her as a semi-retired archivist with gold-framed glasses would have believed, and which was exactly why she'd built her life so that they wouldn't. She'd had a message that afternoon. Not from Vanessa, from a man she had trusted 30 years and buried 3 years back. A message with a delay on it. A dead man's insurance policy finally coming due. Watch the northern crossings tonight. If a car goes into the water, it will not be an accident. Arthur Bell had never once been wrong about a thing like that in life. He had the decency to be right after death, too. Miriam cut the little motor when she heard the rail scream. She'd been idling in the shadow of the pilings, glasses fogged, heart going in a way her doctor would have hated, and when the water swallowed the headlights she counted, 1, 2, 3, and then she saw the pale shape surface 20 yards downstream, arm up, fist closed around something dark, going under again. She was 61 years old. She got there anyway. The gaff hook meant for river debris missed on the first pass, caught nothing but current, and Miriam nearly went over the side reaching for a shape the river kept trading for shadow. The pale shape surfaced again, closer, the arm lower now, the fight in it going out. Miriam threw the hook the way a girl on a Carolina dock had thrown it 60 years ago, before glasses, before the bun, before a whole invented life, and the hook found the collar of a black wool coat and held. She hauled, and swore, and hauled, and the boat tipped hard enough to ship water, and a woman came over the gunwale in a rush of river and dead weight and landed in the bottom of the hull, not breathing. Miriam turned her onto her side, pressed under the ribs, counted, pressed again, her old knees screaming against the aluminum. The river came up out of the woman in a gout, then nothing. Then Miriam pressed once more, hard, angry at the river specifically, and a breath tore in, ragged, furious, alive. Dark eyes opened, almond-shaped, tilted at the outer edge, the color of nothing special, and the shape of someone Miriam had been told to expect. They found Miriam's face in the dark, and did not trust it, and Miriam thought, good, good, trust nothing, not yet. Don't talk, Miriam said. Don't talk, don't sit up, don't do anything but breathe. You're supposed to be dead, and for a little while, we are going to let them believe it. Vanessa's cracked lips moved anyway. One word, more water than voice. Arthur. Miriam's hands went still on the oars. You said a name, she said slowly. Say it again. Arthur Bell. Vanessa's fist was still closed. It came up out of the bottom of the boat, shaking, and opened, and in the wet dark there was a book so waterlogged its pages had turned to a single gray brick, and pressed into its swollen cover by 10 years and 1 drowning, the shape of her palm. He signed the port. He signed the port. Miriam looked at the ruined book. She looked at the woman who had come up out of a murder holding it, and she began, very quietly, to row them both into the black, away from every light on the water, toward a shore where, for the first time since a lamp lit an empty elevator 2 nights ago, nobody at all was watching. Then you're going to want to know what he saw, Miriam said, before they made sure he couldn't tell you. The oars dipped. The city fell away behind them, all that glass, all those lamps, burning for a woman it had already decided was gone. Nora Bennett signed the reading room register with a name that was 6 months old and steadier than her own pulse. Straight black bob, side-parted, thin dark-framed glasses she did not need. She wrote the date, the time, the reason for the visit, conservation assessment, Dumas Holdings, and slid the clipboard back across the desk to the clerk without letting her fingers touch his. The Alden Library kept its rare collection on the 4th floor, behind a door that only opened to a badge and a face. Nora had both now. The badge said Conservation Consultant. The face the badge belonged to had been buried in every database that mattered, and the woman who used to own that face had drowned off a rusted bridge in August. That was the whole point. She rode the elevator up alone and counted the floors out of habit. Old habit, different building, same reflex. The request had come 3 days ago through a channel Miriam trusted, and Nora did not. An inventory flag, routine, boring on its face. A duplicate edition of the same incomplete Monte Cristo she carried out of a burning marriage was sitting in a glass case in Boston, catalogued, waiting, wrong. 2 copies of a book that should only have 1. Somebody had split something in half a long time ago and hidden each half inside a paperback. Nora had spent 6 months not going near it. 6 months of borrowed name and borrowed apartment and Miriam's rules. Today the rule bent, because the case was being deaccessioned, and after deaccession, the book walked out the door with whoever paid, and Nora already knew who was going to pay. The reading room smelled of paper and cold. Long tables, green lamps, 2 other researchers, heads down. She walked to the reference desk and asked for the Dumas. "You're the Conservation Review?" the librarian said. "I am." "We had 2 of you booked today." The woman smiled at the coincidence. Popular book. Nora's left eyebrow held still. She had trained it, all these months, in a bathroom mirror. It held. "Private collectors," she said. "It happens." The librarian went to fetch the case. Nora put on the gloves from her bag. White cotton, thin. She flexed her fingers inside them, and the small scar across the right index finger disappeared under the fabric the way it was supposed to. Everything about her today was designed to disappear. She had gotten good at it. She had gotten too good at it, and some nights, that scared her more than the men who thought she was dead. While she waited, she let her eyes travel the room the way she'd learned to. Exits. 2. The stairwell door and the elevator she'd come up in. The camera in the far corner, a black dome, pointed at the desk and not the tables. The clock above the reference stacks, an old thing, the second hand jerking. She had built a whole life once out of trusting clocks. She caught herself doing the auditor's thing, time-stamping her own arrival in her head. Boston, 4th floor, the minute the book came out. And she let the habit run, because the habit had kept her alive. The book came out on a foam cradle, wine-colored cloth, worn at the spine. The gilt title flaked. She knew before she opened it, knew from the weight, from the give of the boards, that this was the twin. The one Taewon kept had a palm print pressed into its cover now. Hers, from a river. This one was clean. This one had waited in the dark. She opened to the last gathering. The pages ran out early, unbound signatures. Somebody had cut the tail off this book on purpose, the same way somebody had cut the tail off hers, and the 2 tails, she was beginning to understand, were meant to be read against each other. Her hand went to the cover to steady the volume. Another hand came down on the same cloth. Not the librarian's. A man's hand, broad, with discreet dark ink running up the wrist and vanishing into a cuff. A signet ring. A wedding band that had never once come off. Nora did not pull back. Pulling back was what a stranger did. She looked up. Han Tae-won stood on the other side of the table, and for 1 full second neither of them breathed. 6 months. He looked thinner through the face. The tattoo climbed the left side of his neck out of his collar the way it always had. His eyes moved across her. The bob, the glasses, the borrowed name badge clipped to a borrowed coat, and she watched him not recognize her, watched the recognition machine behind his face check her against the dead and come up empty. Then his gaze dropped to her eyes and stopped. The shape, the slight outward tilt at the corners. Color meant nothing, color was ordinary, but the shape of a thing was what a man remembered when he had spent 10 years across a breakfast table from it. She saw the exact instant it landed, his jaw locked. The hand on the book cover pressed down 1/2 centimeter, an involuntary thing, as if the cloth might vanish, as if she might. "Ma'am," the librarian said, returning. "Is there a—" "We're colleagues," Taewon said. His voice came out level. Korean accented, low, the register he used when he had already decided something and was giving nobody a vote. "We'll share the assessment." 2 men had come in behind him. She had not clocked them until now. Dark coats, the wrong stillness for a library, standing at the ends of the aisle like brackets. One of them shifted his weight toward the table. Taewon lifted 2 fingers off the book. Just 2. The men stopped. He said something in Korean, 4 syllables, flat. The nearer man's mouth opened. Taewon said it again, quieter. And the quiet was worse than a shout. Both men turned and walked back out through the door they'd come in by, and the room exhaled without knowing why. The librarian hovered. Nora smiled at her, the smile of a woman with nothing to hide. We'll need about an hour, she said. We'll call if we damage anything. The librarian laughed a little and drifted off to her desk, and then it was the two of them and a book that used to be one book. Taewon sat, slowly, like a man lowering himself into water he wasn't sure would hold. They told me you died, he said. They tried. His eyes went over her face again, greedy and careful at once, cataloging what the surgery of 6 months in hiding had not changed. The car came out of the river, he said. No body. I sat through the inquest. A muscle worked at the hinge of his jaw. I identified a coat. You identified a coat, Nora agreed. Not me. He put both hands flat on the table on either side of the cradle, and she noticed they weren't quite steady, and she filed that away without softening. She had come here for a book. She reminded herself of that. She reminded herself the way Miriam had drilled it into her. You go for the object, you do not go for the man. The man is how they'll get you. You came for this, she said, and touched the winecloth. So did I. Why? An inventory notice, he said. From who? Anonymous. His mouth tightened. The same kind of anonymous that told me you'd be gone by morning. The same kind that told me where the account was. And you believed it then? The words came out of her without heat, which was the only way she could afford to say them. She had promised herself she would not do this, would not open the ledger of who believed what and when, because that ledger had a bottom she wasn't ready to see. But it was out now, one line of it, and it sat on the table between them next to the book. His hands closed. I read the file, he said. 19 million, your name on the account, your signature, your emails. He stopped. I read what I was given to read. You read what he built for you to read. Kwon. She said nothing. She let the name stand there and be true. Taewon looked down at the book, at the amputated pages, at the place where the story had been cut off before its end, and she watched him understand, the way an auditor understands, that a thing cut this cleanly was cut by someone who knew exactly where to put the knife. There are two, he said slowly. There are two. Yours is at the house. In the safe you didn't know I moved it to. Mine went into a river, she said. I got it out. It's not at any house. She let him sit with that she had come out of the water holding the thing he'd slid across a table years ago, that it had mattered enough to hold on to with her lungs full. His eyes came up fast. Something moved in them that she refused to name. Then there are three, he said. No. She turned the book a quarter turn on its cradle, gloved fingers precise. There's one book. It got split into two objects. Read one, you get half a key. Read them together. She stopped herself. She had said more than the man across the table had earned. Miriam's voice again. Measure it out. Measure it out. Taewon leaned in. Half a key to what? To the thing you're about to vote on. The word vote did something to him. He went very still, the specific stillness that had gotten him a nickname, and Nora understood that whatever she'd guessed about the merger, she had guessed close to the bone. The vote's in 11 days, he said. I know when the vote is. She had counted those too. For a moment, he said nothing. His thumb moved along the edge of the table, once, and stopped. Then, low. I have men in this building. I have men on the street. I could take both copies out of here in 4 minutes, and you would not be able to stop me. He said it without threat, as a fact, the way he laid out most facts. That's what I came to do. I know, Nora said. That's why you sent them out of the room. His jaw shifted. She had read him right, and they both knew it, and the power in the room slid an inch across the table toward her and stayed there. So, she said, here are my terms. You don't have terms. You have. I have both halves, she said it flat. You have muscle and a vote you can't win if the account in my name detonates on the floor. You need what's in these pages read correctly, by someone who can read them, before Quan reads them for you. That's me. That has always been me, so I have terms. The book sat between them like a held breath. Say them, he said. 1. The book does not leave with you. It goes into custody I choose. You get access, supervised, nothing more. That's not custody, that's a leash. It's the leash you get. She turned the cradle a fraction, squaring it to the light. You're a man who moves things. Money, people, boats full of nothing through a port that's supposed to be closed. The one thing you don't get to move is this. 2. She kept going. Nothing I show you goes to compliance. Not to Quan, not to the board, not to your sister, not to anyone until I say the chain is complete. You hand one page to the wrong person, and it becomes evidence I stole it. I know how that works. I built cases like that for a living. His eyes flickered. She'd forgotten, for a second, that he knew exactly what she did for a living, that he'd married it. 3. Her voice dropped. You don't tell anyone I'm alive. Not one person. The day one person knows, they finish the job on the bridge. You think I think you already handed me to them once, she said. And there it was, the second line of the ledger, and she watched it land in his chest like a stone going down a well. She had not meant to say it. She said it. And then, because she had trained herself for 6 months not to break, she did not break. She held the man's eyes and let the sentence sit, and did not take it back, and did not soften it, and did not cry. Taewon's hand came off the table and went, without his deciding it, toward the tattooed side of his neck, the old tell, and stopped halfway, and came back down. I didn't hand you to anyone, he said, rough now. I read a file. I told you to give it to compliance. He stopped. The car was that night. The car was that night. The distance between telling a woman to leave and a woman going off a bridge was a distance he was doing in his head right now, and she watched him do the arithmetic, and she watched the number come out wrong for him. Terms, he said, finally, hoarse. Accepted, all 3. You accept fast. I've had 6 months, he said, to be wrong. She wanted to ask what 6 months of being wrong had looked like from inside the house on the water. She didn't. The question belonged to a woman who still lived there, and that woman had gone off a bridge. She pressed her gloved thumb into the worn cloth of the cover instead, and reset her face to the one the badge described. Access, she said. Supervised. That word is going to matter more than you think it does. You'll want to touch these pages. You'll want to read ahead. You'll want to fix it faster than the reading allows, because that's what you do. You close things. This you read at my pace, or not at all. At your pace, he repeated. At mine. She let the smallest edge in. You had your pace already. It ended with a coat in a river. His throat worked. He took it. That was the thing that unsettled her most about the whole hour, that the silent dragon sat across a library table and took it, twice now, without reaching for the men behind the glass. The reading room door opened. Nora's spine went to iron before she turned, but it wasn't a dark coat. It was a woman in her 60s, gold-framed glasses, gray hair in a low bun, a feather-shaped brooch at her collar, and a laminated visitor pass that said, in the library's own font, D.R.M. Caldwell, Visiting Scholar. Miriam crossed the room at the unhurried pace of someone who had been coming to reading rooms for 40 years and had never once been questioned in one. She reached the table. She looked at Taewon. She looked at the two halves of the situation, the man, the book, the woman between them, and she did not sit. You're early, Nora said. You're not alone, Miriam said. It was not quite an accusation. It was the tone of a woman recalibrating a plan in real time and letting you hear the gears. I know who this is. Miriam's brown eyes went over Taewon the way a customs officer reads a passport. The husband. A beat. The one who read the file. Taewon stood, because whatever else he was, he'd been raised to stand for an old woman, and Miriam let him, and did not thank him for it. He's accepted the terms, Nora said. Has he? Miriam set a slim leather folder on the table, snapped it open with 2 fingers, and drew out a single sheet. A transfer of custody form, institutional letterhead, a small foundation Nora had never heard of, which was exactly why it worked. Line for the item, line for the responsible party, line for the release. Then he'll sign this. That's not how, Taewon started. That is exactly how, Miriam said. You want to see what's in the book. She wants the book to survive you wanting it. This makes the book mine, on paper, under a name none of your people can trace, held in a place none of your people know. You get supervised access, she gets a wall. She uncapped a pen and set it on the form. Arthur Bell taught me to never let the man who benefits from a document hold the original. He was right up until the night it got him killed. The name moved through Taewon like a current. Arthur Bell signed the port concession, he said. Arthur Bell signed a great many things, Miriam said. And then he watched them get used, and then he tried to unsign them. And you know how that ended better than I'd like you to. She tapped the form, sign Mr. Han, or take your men and your leash and go lose your vote. For a long moment, nobody moved. The green lamps hummed. Somewhere across the room, a researcher turned a page and had no idea. Taewon picked up the pen. He read the form, all of it, the way he read everything, which was the trait that had made him rich, and the trait that had, once, cost him a wife. Then he signed. His hand was steady now. Whatever had shaken in it earlier had gone somewhere he'd decided to keep it. Miriam blotted the signature, capped the pen, and slid both halves of the document, the book's fate and the man's consent, back into the leather folder. She checked the line where he'd written his name, the way she checked everything, and then she looked up at him over the gold rims. You write your name like a man who's used to it standing for something, she said. Let's find out if it still does. Good, she said. Now nobody in this room owns it. That's how it should be. She looked at Nora, and something in her softened by a single degree. We read them together, tonight, somewhere with no windows on the street. Nora set her gloved hand flat on the wine-colored cover, over the place where his hand had been, and for the first time in 6 months, she was touching the one object in the world that could either clear her name or bury it, and she was not the only one who knew it was real. Taewon watched her hand on the book. He did not reach for it again. Tonight, he said. Miriam picked up the cradle. The librarian looked over, saw the visiting scholar with the proper pass carrying the properly deaccessioned volume in proper foam, and looked back down. The book left the room in the arms of the one person nobody was hunting. At the door, Nora paused. Behind the glass at the end of the aisle, one dark coat still waited, patient, watching his employer walk out beside a dead woman and an old librarian and a book worth a merger. She adjusted the glasses she didn't need. She fixed the shape of her own ordinary eyes on the far wall so the man behind the glass would see nothing worth reporting. Then she followed the book out, and the door with the badge lock clicked shut behind the 3 of them, and somewhere 11 days away a vote sat waiting for a key that had just, for the first time, been carried out of the dark by both of the people it belonged to. The room Miriam chose had no windows and one door, a former map vault under a shuttered auction house 4 blocks from the harbor, 2 lamps, a long steel table. Nora set her copy down first, spine to the left, and Taewon set his beside it, spine to the right, and for a second, the 2 halves of the same book sat close enough to touch, and nobody breathed. Gloves, Miriam said. They both put on gloves. Nora opened her copy to the cut gathering. the pages that had been sliced free of the binding on purpose years ago. Taewon opened his to the matching wound. The paper was the same weight, the same cream gone amber at the edges, and where her copy ended mid-sentence, his copy began mid-sentence, and the sentence was not a sentence. It was numbers. "Look," she said. Down the inner margin of her pages ran a column of tiny figures, penciled so light you'd take them for foxing. Down the inner margin of his pages ran a second column. Alone they were noise. Nora slid the two books until the cut edges kissed, and the columns became rows, and the rows became a table, and the table had a shape she had spent 11 years of her life learning to read on sight. Transfers. "That's a ledger," she said. Her voice came out flat, the way it did at the top of a fall. "That's a payment ledger. He wrote a payment ledger in the margins of a novel." Taewon leaned in. "Who did?" "Arthur Bell," Miriam answered before Nora could. "He didn't trust a safe. He trusted a book nobody finishes." Nora ran one gloved finger down the left column, then across. Dates on the left, amounts in the center, a code on the right, 3 characters each, and she knew those codes. She had chased those codes across 41 payments in a drive that no longer existed. She pressed her lips together and kept reading, because reading was the only thing in the room that still belonged to her. 412, she said. First row, 412,000. The number landed in the middle of the table and sat there. Taewon's head turned. "That's the first phantom payment, yes." She didn't look up. "The one I found at 11:04 at night. It's the first line of Bell's ledger. He logged it 3 years before I ever saw it." Miriam set a legal pad by her elbow and a pencil on top of it, said nothing. Let her work. Nora worked. She matched Bell's rows to what she carried in her head, the 41 payments, the 19 seams, the routing through a terminal the company swore was dead, and Bell's numbers matched hers to the dollar. He had watched the same river of money she had, from 3 years upstream. He had seen the machine while it was still being built, and he had hidden the schematic in the one place a man like Kwon would never think to finish reading. Row 2, 601,000, out to the phantom vendor, the one with 3 consonants, and no vowels, and no address. Row 3, the same money coming back as a loan repayment, smaller, the skim shaved off in the turn. Nora tapped each figure with the flat of her nail as she read it, the way she'd been taught to keep her place across a spreadsheet the size of a wall. "He's showing the seam," she said, half to herself. "Every loan that comes back as a payoff." He drew a little tick beside each one. She counted the ticks down the joined margin. 19, 19, ticks, 19, seams. He found every stitch I found. "You found 19, Taewon said. "I found 19 at 11 at night in a locked room with a master clock. He found 19 3 years ago with a pencil and a novel." She didn't look up. "One of us had better tools. The other one lived longer. For a while." Miriam's pencil scratched steadily on. Nora kept moving. "He was building a case," Taewon said. "He was building a will." Miriam's hands stayed folded. "A dead man's insurance. He told me once, if they ever came for him, the truth would already be somewhere they couldn't burn." Nora reached the bottom of the joined table and stopped. There was a last row, different hand, heavier pencil, pressed hard enough to shine. Not Bell's neat figures. This was written fast, by someone who wrote fast for a living, and the letters leaned the way her own leaned when she was tired. She knew the hand. She'd know it in her sleep. It was hers. "No," she said. "What?" Taewon came around the table. She put her gloved thumb next to the row and didn't touch it. Her own handwriting, a date 14 months back, an account number, and beside the account number, in her own hurried print, 3 words, "Verify before merger." "That's my writing," she said. "That's not possible. It's my writing." She heard her voice climb and pulled it back down by the collar. I wrote that. I wrote in Belle's book 14 months ago and I don't. She stopped. She did remember. Cold ran up the backs of her arms. The library. The reading room. He slid me the book across the table years ago and I kept going back to it. I made notes in the margins of a novel because it felt safe, because nobody finishes it. Miriam's chin lifted. You wrote in the copy that was Taewan's. I wrote in whichever one was on the table. Nora's eyes went to the account number under her own words. And I know that account. Say it slow. She read it aloud, digit by digit, and her mouth went dry around the last 4. That's it. That's the offshore account. The one they opened in my name 14 months ago and filled with $19 million. The lamp buzzed. Nobody moved. You wrote the account number down, Taewan said, before the account existed. No. She shook her head once, hard. I wrote it down because I found it. 14 months ago, I was already pulling the merger apart, quietly, on my own, before anyone bloody knew. I found a number that shouldn't exist, and I flagged it in the one place I trusted. Verify before merger, and I never told a soul. Her jaw tightened. I never told you. The last 3 words did something to his face. Not much. A muscle at the hinge of his jaw. But she'd been married to that face for a decade, and she saw it move. You were investigating the merger, he said. 14 months ago. In secret. Yes. How? The way I do everything. Quietly. At night. 2 months before anyone put the word merger on a memo, I pulled the concession filings for the port, Belle's filings, and there was a number on them that didn't tie to anything, an account that took money in and never paid tax, never paid a vendor, never did the one thing accounts are supposed to do, which is move. She turned her copy a degree toward the light. So I wrote it here, in the margin of the one book I knew nobody would ever pick up and read to the end. Verify before merger, because I already knew the merger was the reason the number existed. I just didn't know whose number it was. You never said one word. Neither did you. It came out before she could weigh it. 10 years, and neither of us said one word about the thing that was going to eat us. That's what the 2 of us built. A house full of things we didn't say. He held still. Behind him, Miriam picked up the pencil at last and began copying the joined table onto the legal pad, row by row, her gray head bent, giving them the fiction of privacy. Nora made herself go back to the page. Feeling would keep. The number would not. Look at the code column, she said. Businesslike now, and he came back to the book because it was easier than the other thing. Every row has an authorization code, 3 characters. Belle logged who signed each transfer out. And they're all the same code. She traced it. AB-7. Arthur Bell, clearance 7. His own signature. Every single line. Belle's credentials authorized all 41 payments. Taewan went very quiet in the way the file said he went quiet, the way that had earned him a nickname. Then Belle was dirty. That's what it looks like. Nora sat back. That's exactly what it looks like. That's what it's supposed to look like. She pulled her copy closer and turned it toward the lamp until the pencil caught the light at an angle. But Belle was careful. A careful man logs the truth in his own hand, and then he protects it. Miriam, what did he tell you? Never let the man who benefits from a document hold the original. Word for word, Miriam said, not looking up. So he wouldn't sign 41 crimes with his own name and then hide the ledger to save himself. That's suicide, not insurance. She turned the page flat. Unless the codes aren't his signature. Unless they're his evidence. Meaning what? Meaning Belle logged whose credentials were used, not who used them. She looked up at him. His clearance opened those transfers. That's true. But clearance 7 belonged to Belle. And to the 2 people who could borrow it. The port office kept a shared authority key for the concession. Belle had it. and it lived in exactly one other place. She waited. Compliance. For audit. The word sat there. Quan, Taewon said. Quan had standing access to Bell's clearance codes. For audit, that's the whole job. Compliance holds the master keys, so nobody else has to. Her hands had gone steady now. Dead steady, the way they did when the number finally clicked into a name. Quan didn't forge a signature. He didn't need to. He used a real code that belonged to a dead man, and the system logged it as Bell, and if anyone ever pulled the thread, it would hang Arthur Bell, who couldn't argue, because Arthur Bell was 3 years in the ground. He ran 19 million through a corpse. He ran 19 million through a corpse's key, she said. And then, when I got too close, he needed a live body to pin it on. A dead man can't stand trial. A dead man can't force a board to vote scared. She tapped the page beside her own 3 words. But a wife with the auditor's own credentials, who just happens to have written the account number in her own hand 14 months ago, she can. He didn't invent me out of nothing. He found the notes I'd hidden, and he built the frame on top of the one thing that was really mine. Miriam's pencil had stopped. He found this book? No. Nora shut her eyes a second. He found something like it. A copy of my notes. A photograph. A file. I don't know. He knew what my handwriting said before I did. That's why the account matched what I'd flagged. That's why it looked like a confession. She opened her eyes. I wrote verify before merger, and he read it as, here is where she confesses. Same words. He just needed the world to read them his way. Taewon put both hands flat on the steel table and leaned on them. The wedding band clicked once against the metal. So the account in your name, he said slowly, was built out of a real number you really found, which is why I could never explain it away. Every time I said it's fake, half of it was true, the account was fake, the number was real. I did find it. I did write it down. I did keep it from everyone, including you. He wrapped a lie around a fact and handed the fact to me to hold. Her mouth twisted. You read that file and you saw my own handwriting in it. Of course you did. Of course you believed it. He looked at her. I read what I was given. You said that in the library. I'm saying it again, because it's the worst thing I've ever done. He straightened. I had your handwriting in front of me, and I never asked why. She let that stand. She didn't rush to soften it, and she didn't twist the knife. She looked back down at the 2 books making one table under the lamp, because the table was the point, and the table was almost finished. There's a second column I skipped, she said. Far right of your copy. Not amounts, not codes. She slid his book a half-inch. Locations. He looked. A short stack of entries in Belle's small hand, and beside each a mark. Not a word, a symbol. A little box with a number inside it. Containers, Nora breathed. Those are container numbers. He was logging where the money bought its way in and out. Physical cargo. Not just wire transfers. Cargo. She stopped herself before she ran further down that road. That road was for later. That road was the whole game, and she wasn't going to burn it tonight on a hunch. She lifted her finger off the page. That's next. Not now. Now we finish what's in front of us. Miriam looked up over the gold rims. What's in front of us is that you can prove the account number predates the account. Yes. And that Bell's ledger logs the same 41 payments you found, in his hand, 3 years early. Yes. And that the authorization on all of them is a clearance code Quan could reach and Bell couldn't defend. That's the spine of it. Nora sat back and pressed the heels of her gloved hands against her eyes for 1 second, then dropped them. It's not the whole chain. A code Quan could reach isn't a code Quan used. Any lawyer he owns will say Bell did it himself. I need to put Quan's hand on that key. I don't have that yet. What would put his hand on it? Taewon asked. A log. a physical access log for the compliance vault, where the master keys live. A timestamp that says Kwan Il-sung pulled clearance 7 on a day Belle was already dead. She spread her gloved fingers on the table. 3 years dead. If Belle's key authorized a payment made after his funeral, then Belle didn't make it, and only one office holds the key after the man who owned it is gone. She looked at him. That log exists. Compliance keeps everything. He'll have buried it, moved it, renamed it, but he won't have destroyed it, because a man who destroys his own audit trail is a man who knows he's guilty, and Kwan needs to believe he's clean, even when he's alone. Her jaw set. That's the piece I go after next. Not tonight. Tonight, I only prove the frame is a frame. But you have the shape now, Taewon said. I have the shape. She looked at the 2 books, spine to spine, one story in 2 halves, finally lying flat. For 14 months, I thought I was the only one who'd seen the merger for what it was. Turns out a dead man saw it first, and I wrote 3 words in his book without knowing I was signing my own death warrant. She almost laughed and didn't. Verify before merger. I did verify. It just took getting murdered to finish the sentence. Miriam went back to copying. Taewon pulled the lamp closer and looked at his wife's handwriting in the margin of the book he'd slid across a library table a decade ago, back when the worst thing between them was silence. And something in his shoulders changed that Nora chose not to name out loud. You kept it from me, he said. Not an accusation now. Almost a question. You'd have taken it to the board. She said it plainly. You'd have done it clean and slow and by the rules, and Kwan would have watched every step. I kept it from you to keep it alive, and it nearly got me killed, and it kept me alive. Both. That's the marriage, isn't it? That's the whole 10 years in one flagged number. You could have trusted me with 3 words. Could I? She turned the book so the margin faced him square. You had a brother's blood in that company. You had a name that opened every door in that building. If I'd told you my number pointed at your own house, what would you have done the night before your merger vote? She waited, and he didn't answer, and the not answering was the answer. You'd have gone to check it yourself, quietly, loyally, and Kwan would have known I'd found it before the ink was dry. So I wrote it in a book instead of telling my husband. And you read a file instead of asking your wife. 2 people in one house, each protecting the other by keeping their mouth shut, and Kwan walked straight down the hallway between us. Taewon said nothing for a long moment. Then, I identified a coat in a morgue, and I believed a folder over 10 years. I flagged a crime and hid it from the one man who could have died beside me over it. She almost smiled. We were very good at silence. It's the one thing we ever built together that worked. He didn't answer. He reached out and, without touching the page, held one gloved hand flat above her 3 words, like a man warming his palm at a fire, and Nora watched his hand, and not his face, and understood that whatever he had believed for 6 months had just come apart on a steel table under 2 lamps. Miriam set her own finished copy down and slid it across the steel. Read me the top line, she said. Out loud. I want to hear it said by someone who's alive to say it. Nora read it. Date, amount, code, the little box with the container number inside. Miriam nodded once, slow, and for a second the old woman's mouth pressed thin, the way it did when a thing Arthur Bell had died protecting finally paid out into living hands. Copy it twice, Miriam said quietly, tearing the top sheet free. One stays with me. One never leaves this room until the vote. Nora took the pencil. She started the second copy herself, her own steady hand laying Bell's numbers down beside her own, the dead man's evidence, and the live woman's confession finally reading as the same sentence. Date, amount, code, container mark, row after row, and with every row the frame that had thrown her off a bridge turned inside out, no longer a wall built to bury her, but a map somebody else had drawn first, and she was only now learning to read aloud. 412, 601, the turn, the payoff, the tick in the margin. She wrote until her wrist ached and did not stop, because the woman who wrote these numbers down was not a woman anyone had murdered, and at the bottom, under the last row, under the account number that had almost buried her, she added one line of her own, in the margin, the way Belle had taught her without ever meaning to. It said, "Whose hand on the key?" She underlined it once. Then she looked up at the two men she'd trusted least and needed most, and the buzz of the lamp was the only sound in the vault. And 11 days out, a vote was still waiting, and now it was waiting for a name. Miriam had the address before the sun came up, not spoken. Written, in the back of a hymnal she kept in her bag, on a page where a dead man had once penciled a line she'd never understood until now. A storage row, a lock number, a town 2 hours north where the tide came up over the road twice a day. Arthur Bell's last box, the one he never told the lawyers about. They drove in Miriam's rented sedan, not Nora's car, not anything with a plate a Han man might have seen. Taewon sat in the back with his hands flat on his knees. He'd offered to bring his people. Nora had said no before the sentence finished landing, and he'd let it go, and that was its own kind of answer. The storage place sat behind a bait shop that had been closed so long the sign had bleached to nothing. Row F, Unit 41. Nora heard the number and something in her jaw ticked, because 41 was the number of ghost payments, and Arthur Bell had a sense of humor, and dead men leave jokes for the people who arrive too late. Miriam worked the lock with a key that had been taped inside the hymnal spine for 3 years. It gave on the second try. Inside, a folding chair, a card table, a filing box the color of old teeth. No treasure, no wall of secrets, just a box a careful man had packed and walked away from, knowing. Nora crouched and lifted the lid. Photographs. Slick, printed, the kind you get at a pharmacy counter, because Belle hadn't trusted a cloud any more than he'd trusted a safe. She fanned them across the card table under the one bulb that worked. The first ones meant nothing to Taewon. Manifests, a crane, a gate log. But Nora's fingers stopped on the fourth photograph and stayed there. A bridge. Rust. 2 working lamps out of 6. "That's Marrow Point," she said. Taewon leaned in. The photo was shot from above, from the embankment, at night, with a lens that ate the dark. A car half through the guardrail, her car, small, pale, nose down toward the black water, and behind it, parked with its lights off, calm as a man who had all night, a second car. Nora slid the next photo over, same night, closer. The plate on the second car was smeared with mud, deliberate, but the frame around the plate was not. A dealer frame, a logo, and below the logo, stenciled on the rear quarter panel, where a fleet marks its own, so the motor pool knows whose is whose, a 3-letter yard code she had audited 100 times. "Security fleet," she said. "Internal. That car belongs to the company." Taewon didn't answer. He picked up the photograph the way you pick up something that might still be warm. Miriam set a 5th print down beside it, without a word. This one showed the driver's door of the second car open, and a man standing in the gap, phone to his ear, face turned 3/4 to the lens, because Arthur Bell had been patient, and Arthur Bell had waited for the face. Restless eyes, strong jaw, a short scar through the right eyebrow, pale in the flash. "Lee Sung-ho," Taewon said. His voice came out flat and low, the register a man uses right before he stops being reasonable. "You're head of field security." Nora didn't make it a question either. "He reports to Kwon on paper." Taewon set the photo down very gently, which was worse than throwing it. "He reports to me in the room." Nora watched his hand. The wedding band caught the bulb. She'd spent 6 months building a case out of numbers because numbers didn't have faces, and now there was a face, and it was a face that had eaten at his table. He was there, she said. He watched the guardrail go. He timed it. Miriam spoke from the doorway, where she'd stayed to keep her eyes on the road and the water. 8 minutes. Belle wrote it in the margin of the last manifest. No body inside 8 minutes, they leave. Sung-ho's men followed the instruction. Belle was on the far bank with a boat and a bad heart, and he shot 40 frames, and then he mailed himself the key, and died 4 days later of what the certificate calls a heart attack. The bulb buzzed. Nora gathered the bridge photos into a stack, squared the edges the way she squared everything, and that small, ordinary motion was the only thing keeping her hands from shaking. "This is it," she said. "This is the hand on the key, not the compliance vault log. Better. Sung-ho on the bridge the night I died, in a company car, on Kwan's payroll. You put him in a deposition room, and the whole thing unspools. The frame, the merger, Belle, all of it hangs off him." "Then we get him in a room," Taewon said. "You get him in a room." Nora looked up. "I'm dead, remember. You're the only one of us who can make a phone ring and have Sung-ho answer it." Taewon took out his phone. Nora and Miriam listened to a call in Korean. 4 sentences, clipped. The tone of a man summoning an employee and nothing more. He ended it and slid the phone back into his coat. "Tomorrow," he said. "My office. Alone. He thinks it's about the vote." Miriam locked the unit behind them. On the drive back, the tide had come up over the low part of the road, and Taewon told her to wait, and they sat in the sedan with the engine off and the water sliding gray across the asphalt, and no one said the thing they were all counting. 9 days to the vote, 1 witness, 1 road out. The road out closed at 11 the next morning. Nora was in the map vault when Miriam's phone lit. She read it twice, the way she read everything, and then she set the phone face down on the steel table with a click that was too soft for how much it meant. "Sung-ho didn't come to the office," Miriam said. Nora stood. "He didn't come home either." Miriam's thumb hovered over the screen. "His card cleared a fuel station north of the border crossing at 6 this morning. His phone went dark at 6:40. Taewon's people found the company car in long-term parking at the airport, with the fleet transponder pulled out and left on the seat. He ran. He ran." Miriam finally looked up. Somebody told him the meeting wasn't about the vote. Nora didn't ask who. She already knew the shape of it. There were 4 people who knew Sung-ho was being called into a room, and one of them had made the call, and 2 of them were standing in this vault, which left the 4th, the one whose name lived at the bottom of every ledger, and Kwan did not need to be told. Kwan watched the way she watched. He'd have felt the air change the second Taewon's summons went out through a channel Kwan owned. She sat back down slowly. "The photographs are still real," she said, and heard how thin it came out. "The photographs are a bridge and a car and a man." Miriam's voice was kind, and it was merciless, both at once. In a courtroom, Sung-ho explains them. Standing in a witness box, sweating, he explains them badly, and Kwan falls. Gone north with no forwarding address. He's a rumor. A photo of a man who isn't there proves the man isn't there. That's all. The bulb buzzed. Nora looked at the box of Arthur Bell's careful, useless frames, and for the first time since the river, she felt the specific cold of a plan running out of witnesses. Taewon came at dusk. He came in fast, coat still on, and put a tablet on the steel table before he'd fully sat. "There's more," he said. "Sung-ho didn't just run. He mailed something first. From the fuel station. Overnight, to my private box, not the office." He turned the tablet so the screen faced her. Insurance. Same trick Bell used. A man who thinks he might be killed leaves a copy where it hurts the people who'd kill him. On the screen was a scan, an internal review memo, Han letterhead, the private grade, the kind that never reaches a board. Nora read the date first, because she always read the date first. The memo was 6 months old. She read the second line, and the third, and the room went very quiet in the way a room goes quiet when the last thing you were protecting turns out to have never been there. The memo was an assessment of the evidence against her. Cool, itemized, professional. It walked through the offshore account, the signatures, the emails, the timestamps, and in the margin, in a hand she had shared a bed with for 10 years, 3 words. This doesn't hold. Beneath it, initialed, his, 6 months old. The memo was ordered, and read, and annotated, 6 months ago, which was 5.5 months after they told him she was dead, and around the time, she did the arithmetic without wanting to, the way an auditor's brain never stops, around the time he was standing in a mortuary corridor identifying a coat. You knew, she said. Taewon's jaw worked. I suspected. I ordered a private review. I read the file with my own people, not Kwan's, and it didn't hold. The account was too clean. The emails were too much in your voice. He didn't look away, and she'd give him that later, in the part of herself she wasn't using right now. I knew the frame was a frame 6 months ago. You knew 6 months ago. She stood. The chair scraped. And you buried it in a private box. You didn't take it to the board. You didn't clear my name. You let the merger file walk toward a vote with me still in it as the thief. You let me stay dead. I thought you were dead. So clear, a dead woman. Her voice cracked the air and she pulled it back down, because loud was Kwan's weapon and she would not borrow it. She lowered it to something that cut better. You thought your wife died a criminal. You had proof she wasn't, and you filed it. For 6 months you sat on the one page that could have given a dead woman her name back, and you did nothing, because doing something meant standing up in that boardroom and saying Kwan built this, and you weren't ready to lose the vote over a woman you'd already buried. Silence. That's the memo, she said. That's what it says, not. This doesn't hold. It says. I believed her too late, and I still didn't move. Taewon said nothing, which was the truest thing he'd said all night. Miriam looked between them and, for once, did not intervene. Nora sat back down. She looked at the tablet, at the 3 words in his hand, at the initials. Then she looked at Arthur Bell's box, and the bridge photos, and the ledger copies squared on the steel, and all the careful, patient, dead man's work stacked up in a windowless room 4 blocks from a port. She was tired in a place that 6 months of running had not reached. I'm out, she said. Taewon's head came up. The investigation. She kept her voice even. The vote. All of it. I've been building a chain for half a year, and every link that could carry weight has walked out a door or died of a heart attack or spent 6 months in your private box. Bell's dead. Sung-ho's gone. The photos prove a bridge. The ledger proves I'm meticulous, which any judge will hear as. She'd know exactly how to build a fake. She spread her hands over the table. There is no witness left standing who wasn't paid by Kwan or married to me. I can't win this, so I stop. You don't mean that, Miriam said quietly. I mean the tactics. Nora's eyes were dry and clear. I stop chasing his people because his people vanish. I stop building the perfect chain because he cuts links faster than I forge them. She stood again, and this time it was not anger, it was decision, and the two looked nothing alike on her face. I stop coming at Kwan sideways. Then how? Taewon said. I let him come to me. She was already reaching for her coat. A man who cuts a witness the same morning I call for one is a man who's watching the board close. Sung-ho running scared him. It means he thinks the vote is tight. A frightened man doesn't tighten his grip. He starts making offers. Miriam's eyes narrowed. You want to draw him out. I want him on a phone. Nora pulled the black wool coat on, the lining still marked where a memory card had once ridden through the dark against her ribs. Dead women are cheap to threaten, but a dead woman who surfaces, quiet, with a price, that he understands. That's a language Quan speaks. He'll know it's you, Taesuan said. He thinks you're gone. Then let him get the surprise of his life over the phone, where I control every word, and he controls none. She looked at Miriam. I need a clean line. Untraceable. And I need it to record both ends. Miriam was already moving. They did it that night, from the vault, on a phone that belonged to a foundation that did not exist. Through a relay Miriam had kept warm for exactly this. Nora wrote nothing down. She'd rehearsed the shape of it in her head, the way she rehearsed everything. Enough to be steady, loose enough to follow him where he led. Quan answered on the fourth ring. She counted them. The silence after his hello lasted exactly long enough for a careful man to run the odds on a number he didn't know. You've been away, Quan said finally, in Korean, then English, testing which she'd take. She took the English. She wanted every word admissible. I've been dead, Nora said. It didn't suit me. Another silence, shorter. When he spoke again, the courtesy had gone crystalline, which was how she knew he'd decided she was real and was already pricing her. The account in your name is still open, he said. The board still has the file. A woman in your position has very little room. A woman in my position has a book. She let that sit. 2 books, actually, and a ledger somebody wrote in the margins 3 years before you got greedy. You know the one, AB7, the clearance you pulled off a dead man because his code's still logged. The pause this time was the pause of a man recalculating an entire board. What do you want? Quan said. Not a question, a negotiation opening, exactly what she needed him to make it. I want to know the number, Nora said, before I decide whether to be alive in that boardroom next week. And Quan, who had built a $19 million frame on the belief that everyone has a number, gave her one. He named a figure. He named an account she could reach it through. He named the thing he wanted in exchange. The books, both of them. The ledger, and her silence, permanent, restored to the comfort of the dead. He explained, patient as a man explaining terms to a subordinate, that the offer expired the morning of the vote, that a wire could clear in an hour, that there was no version of the next week in which she won, and every version in which she was paid. He said all of it in his own clean, careful, unhurried voice. Nora watched the little red bar climb across Miriam's screen the whole time, and she did not smile, because smiling changes a voice, and she needed her voice to give him nothing but the sound of a woman thinking about money. I'll consider it, she said, when he was done. Consider quickly, Quan said, and ended the call. The vault was silent except for the buzz of the bulb and the small electronic click of Miriam stopping the recording. Nora set the dead phone on the steel table beside the bridge photographs and the 6-month-old memo and Arthur Bell's 40 patient frames. She'd walked away from the investigation an hour ago. She hadn't stopped working for a second. He said the account number out loud, Miriam said, very quietly, like a woman who didn't quite believe a careful man could be that arrogant or that frightened. He always says the number. Nora looked at the red bar, frozen full across the screen. That's the whole disease. He's spent so long deciding what people are worth, he forgot some of them are listening. Taesuan was staring at the phone, then at her. 6 months of a private memo sat on the table between them, and neither of them touched it. You said you were out, he said. Nora picked up her copy of the ledger, the one in her own hand, the one with the line she'd underlined herself. She folded it once and put it in the inside pocket of the black coat, the pocket with the zipper. I'm out of losing, she said. That's different. She looked at the recording and the photographs, and the man who had believed her too late and buried it, and 8 days now, stood between her and a vote she had just, quietly, in a windowless room, stopped intending to lose. Then the bulb over the table flickered once, twice, and Miriam's phone, still warm in her hand, lit up with a number none of them had given anyone, and the name on the screen was Han. Miriam turned the phone face down on the steel table before she answered it, so the light wouldn't touch their eyes. Then she thumbed the speaker on and said nothing. A woman's voice came through the little speaker. Steady, careful, don't hang up. I know she's there. Taiwan's head came up. He knew that voice before the second sentence landed. Su-jin. Appa. A breath. I packed her a bag once. I have thought about that bag every night for 6 months. Nobody in the vault moved toward the phone. Nora watched Taiwan's hand flatten on the steel, the wedding band clicking once against the metal, and she watched the muscle in his jaw set. How did you get this number? Miriam said. Flat? A test, not a question. Quan keeps a list of the phones he's afraid of, Su-jin said. I copied it. He doesn't know I can read a spreadsheet. He thinks I arrange flowers for the board dinners. A pause. I arranged the flowers for the vote, too. That's why I'm calling. It moved. Nora leaned toward the phone. Say that again. The port vote, Su-jin said. It was 8 days out. Quan pulled it forward. It's the day after tomorrow. Morning session. He told the board a leak forced his hand. The voice dropped. He's not waiting for anyone to consider anything. He's closing the door. Taiwan and Nora looked at each other across the 2 open books. 8 days had just become 2. Quan had felt the air change, same as she'd said he would, and a frightened man who names numbers also moves calendars. Why us? Miriam said. Why now? Because I identified a coat too, Su-jin said, and her voice cracked on the word coat and then rebuilt itself. Because my brother married a woman I liked and then let her drown on paper. And because Quan called me yesterday and told me which way to vote. He doesn't ask, he tells. That's when I decided which side of this I'm on. A beat. I can get one of you into the terminal. Tomorrow night. Before the session. That's the offer. Nora looked down at the 2 spines aligned on the table. Left and right. The cut edges kissing. The ledger in Belle's cramped hand running across both margins like a single sentence torn in half. Datas, valores, códigos. And that last column, the one only Taiwan's copy carried, the little boxes with numbers inside them. The containers, Nora said. What? Not you, Nora said to the phone. To the room. She pulled the second lamp closer and put her gloved finger on the container column, top box, and dragged it down the page. She had told them, in this same vault, that's next, not now. Now had arrived. She read the boxes out loud. Not values this time, positions. Row, bay, tier. The coordinate grid every terminal in the world stacks steel by, and beside each coordinate, a code, and the codes were the same 3 consonant strings that named the ghost vendor in her audit. Belle hadn't just logged where the money went, he'd logged where it sat. He didn't launder it all, she said, and her voice picked up, quick, low, running ahead of her own hands. You can't wash 19 million through empty barges in 1 year without a bruise. So he parked the rest. Physical. He bought cargo through the fake vendor and left it on a terminal that's supposed to be dead, because nobody audits a dead terminal. She looked up. The 2 books aligned aren't a metaphor, they're a map. Row F bays 9 through 14. Belle wrote us a grid reference 3 years before we knew to look. Row F. Miriam's head came around at that. Belle used row F for his storage unit. He liked a number that meant something twice, Nora said. Her mouth almost went somewhere warm, and then didn't. Not now. Taiwan had already picked up his own phone. Su-jin. The terminal. Which gate is soft? North Service Gate. The one they never rebadged after they closed it. Her voice steadied around having a task. Quan rotates 2 men through it. They report the shift change to the same channel he watches. I can make the shift change late by 40 minutes. Flowers get delivered to the security office the morning of a vote. Nobody searches a flower cart. 40 minutes, Nora said. 40 minutes, Sujin said. Use them or don't. I have to go. Oppa. She stopped. Whatever she had planned to say to her brother, she swallowed it. Don't let her drown twice. The line went dead. Miriam turned the phone back over. The name Han sat on the dark screen for 1 more second, then vanished. The North Service Gate opened 40 minutes late, exactly as promised, and Nora went through it alone. That had been the fight. Taewon wanted his own body on that terminal. Nora put a gloved hand flat on his chest in the vault and said the thing that ended it. If you get seen, it's the heir walking his own crime scene. If I get seen, I'm a dead woman who was never here. She'd won because she was right, and because he'd had 6 months to learn she was usually right, and had wasted them. The terminal at night was a graveyard of stacked steel, and Row F stood at the dead end where the lamps had been let to die. She counted bays by the painted numerals, 9, 10, 11, boots quiet on wet concrete, the cold coming up through the ground into her knees. Bay 14, Tier 2, a container the color of dried blood, its door seal intact, its manifest tag reading, deaccessioned, hold. She didn't need to open it. She needed to prove it existed where Belle said it would, holding what Belle said it held. She photographed the seal, the tag, the bay numeral, the container's fleet code, and the fleet code carried the same 3-letter stamp as the security car on the bridge. Same registry, same owner. The dead terminal, the drowning car, and the ghost vendor all wore the one family's initials. She crouched and photographed the base plate too, where the customs sticker should have been and wasn't, where a bonded container becomes contraband the second the paperwork stops. A container that pays for insurance nobody claims, steel that sits in a bay on a terminal the company swore to a regulator it had shut. Bell had understood the trick better than the men who paid him to sign it. You can hide a wire transfer in a spreadsheet, but you cannot hide 40 tons of parked steel from a man who counts. So he had counted. 3 years dead, and still counting for her. She was reaching for the manifest pouch bolted to the door when a light swung across the stack 2 bays down. She went still against the cold steel. A guard, early or curious, walking the row with a torch. Nora slid the phone into the zippered pocket of the black coat, the same pocket that held her copy of the ledger, and she made herself into a shadow between 2 containers and did not breathe loud. The torch reached Bay 14, held on the red door, held on the hold tag. Then a radio crackled at the guard's hip, a voice in Korean, 4 syllables. "Shift's covered. Come in." And the light swung away and the boots went with it. Sujin's 40 minutes, spending themselves down to the last coin. Nora peeled the manifest pouch off the door, folded it into her coat, and walked out the way the flowers had come in. She got back to the vault at 2 in the morning and put the manifest on the steel table between the 2 books, and for a moment nobody spoke, because the chain was closed. Bell's ledger named the money. The margins named the container. The container wore the fleet code. The fleet code drove the bridge. And the recording, Miriam tapped the little device once, and Kwan's own voice filled the vault, naming a figure, naming an account. The offer expires the morning of the vote. The recording put the architect's hand on all of it in his own words. Nora sat down hard in the folding chair. 6 months of running, and it fit in the space of a card table. Taewon stood on the other side of the books. He had not said a word since she came back through the door alive. Now he took his phone out, and Nora tensed, because a phone in his hand had put her in a river once. "What are you doing?" she said. The thing I should have done 6 months ago. He didn't look up from the screen. There's a board distribution list. Every director, the corporate secretary, outside counsel, the exchange liaison. One message reaches all of them, and it cannot be recalled. Nora was on her feet. If you send Kwan's evidence early, he burns the container before the vote. I'm not sending the evidence. Now he looked at her. I'm sending the retraction. He turned the phone so she could read it. It was addressed to the full board, under his own name, no lawyer between his hand and the words. It said, the fraud attributed to Vanessa Cole-Han was fabricated. It said, the offshore account bearing her name was opened by internal compliance using clearance codes belonging to a dead signatory. It said she was, in the plain vocabulary of an audit, innocent, and that he had known the file did not hold for 6 months, and had failed her by staying silent. It did not ask for anything. It did not mention a marriage. It did not say, "Come back." "They'll know you're compromised," Nora said. "They'll say you're covering for your wife. Let them." He held her eyes. "You told me I already handed you to them once. I'm handing you back, in front of everyone, before I know if it costs me the vote, so no one can say I only did it once, I'd won." His thumb hovered. "This one isn't a condition. You don't owe me a door for it." She looked at him, at the man who had identified a coat and believed a file for 10 years, who had let the silence walk between them, wearing Kwan's cufflinks. She thought about the margin of her own book, the account number she'd written before the account existed. Verify before merger. The whole doomed carefulness of a woman who trusted paper over the man across the breakfast table. "Send it," she said. He sent it, and in the second after, before the phone even confirmed it, while the little wheel was still turning, Nora crossed the space between them and took his face in both gloved hands and kissed him. It was her hands, her choice, her decision, made in a windowless room at 2 a.m, with the evidence closing between them, and she did not ask, "May I?" And she did not wait to be sure it was allowed. His breath caught, and then his hand came up to the back of her head, careful, like she might still be underwater. Miriam looked very hard at the ledger and said, dry as chalk, "The vote is in 31 hours. Nora stepped back. Her thumb wiped the corner of her own mouth, once, and the left eyebrow stayed still, and she almost laughed. "Then we should sleep," she said, and none of them did. The Port Authority session convened at 9 the next morning in a room with a horseshoe table and one door, and Kwan Il-sung took his seat at the compliance chair believing he had already won. He'd read Taewon's retraction. Of course he had. He'd spent the night telling every director who would take his call that the heir had lost his judgment to grief, that a fabricated wife had reached out from wherever fabricated wives go and clouded a strong man's mind, that the vote must proceed for the good of the merger and the memory of the company. He had a figure ready. He always had a figure ready. He did not have a plan for the woman who walked in behind Dr. M. Caldwell, visiting scholar, and set a foam cradle on the horseshoe table and opened it. Nora took off the glasses she didn't need. She took off the disguise the only way that mattered. She looked at the room with her own eyes, the shape of them, the outer tilt, and let the 3 directors who'd known Vanessa Cole-Han for a decade recognize her one at a time. A chair scraped. Someone said her name, the real one, half a question. "I'm not dead," Nora said. "I'm going to walk you through why someone needed me to be." Kwan rose. "This woman is a fugitive and a thief, and this is theater." "Sit down, Mr. Kwan," Miriam said, and set the first book on the table. Nora laid the 2 spines together and let them see it. 1 volume cut in half. 1 ledger written across both margins in a dead man's hand 3 years before anyone said the word merger out loud. She read the first line, 412,000, and named the timestamp 2304, and set beside it the container manifest with the fleet code, and set beside that a single photograph from Belle's box, the bridge, the second car, the fleet code again. She built it the way she'd built the audit, one seam at a time, 19 ticks in red, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not hurry, because the numbers did the shouting for her. "The account is in my name," she said. "I'll grant Mr. Kwan that. Every code that moved the money is Arthur Bell's clearance 7. I'll grant him that too. Except Arthur Bell was 3 years in the ground when the last of these payments cleared." She looked down the horseshoe. A dead man's badge opened these doors. Only 2 people ever held clearance 7. One of them is in a grave he was put in early. She let it sit. The other one is telling you to vote. "Speculation," Kwan said, but his hand had found his cufflink and was turning it. "Then let's not speculate," Nora said, and nodded to Miriam. Miriam pressed the device once. Kwan's own voice walked into the room and named a figure and named an account to receive it, and traded it for 2 books and a ledger and a woman's permanent silence. "The offer expires the morning of the vote. The wire clears in 1 hour. There is no version where you win." 30 seconds. His own cadence. He'd always said the number. The room did not gasp. It did something quieter and worse for Kwan. It went to paper. Directors reaching for pens. The corporate secretary already typing. The exchange liaison stepping into the corner with a phone against her ear. A director at the near curve of the horseshoe, a man who had voted Kwan's way for years, put his pen down very slowly, and the sound of it touching the table was louder in that room than any shout. He looked at the account number Nora had circled, and then at the compliance chair, and something in his face closed like a ledger at end of day. That was the moment it turned. Not the recording. The pen. Kwan looked at Taewon. Whatever he expected to find in the heir's face, he didn't find it. "You'd burn the whole merger," he said, "for her." "No," Taewon said. "I'd suspend a merger built on a murder. Her name comes back either way." He set his own phone on the table, screen up, the retraction still open on it. "That part's already done. You just watched me lose whatever you thought I was afraid to lose." The chair called the vote. The merger did not pass. It was suspended pending referral, which is the polite institutional word for "The police are coming." 2 directors moved to strip Kwan of clearance on the spot. The exchange liaison, still in the corner, said into her phone the 2 words that end men like him. Regulatory hold. Kwan Il-sung did not run. There was nowhere on a horseshoe table to run to. He straightened his cufflink one last time, the antique one, and he looked at Nora with the small, observant eyes of a man who had spent his whole life deciding what people were worth, and had finally met a ledger he couldn't cook. "You should have taken the number," he said. "You should have known some of us were listening," she said, and that was the last thing she ever said to him. The referral did the rest over the weeks that followed, the way water does the rest to a cracked wall. The 2 men who'd stood on Marrow Point counting to 8 surfaced the moment the fleet code did, because frightened subordinates trade their bosses for lighter walls, and their statements put Kwan on the phone that night. Lee Sung-ho, somewhere north of the border with his transponder in his pocket, mailed one more piece of insurance to the only address he trusted now that Kwan was finished, and it corroborated the rest. The bank that had opened an account 14 months before its holder ever heard of it found itself explaining a great deal to people with subpoenas. Vanessa Colehand's name came off the fraud and went on to something else. She didn't go back to the 32nd floor. She took the ledger, the real one, the copy of the copy she'd made on a pharmacy card the morning of the 10th, and never stopped carrying, and she built an outfit that did the thing no one inside a company had been allowed to do for her: an independent forensic institute, custody of records kept by people who didn't benefit from the documents they held. Arthur Bell's rule, made into a building. Miriam took the desk beside hers and pretended to be retired. Taewon did not appear at the ribbon. He sent no flowers, made no statement, claimed no share of what she'd built. The condition he'd never asked for. He kept on his own, which is to say he stayed away and let her name belong to her. Months later, on a gray afternoon, a man came into the reading room of the Institute, where the second volume of Monte Cristo lay under glass. Whole now, the two halves rejoined at last, the ledger photographed and sealed, and the book allowed to simply be a book again. He stopped a careful distance from the case. He'd learned distance. His hand, the one with the band still on it, stayed at his side. Vanessa was at the far table with her gloves on. She saw the tattoo down the left of his neck before she saw the rest of him, and she set down her pen. He didn't cross the room. He looked at the book under the glass, and then at her, and he asked the only question left that mattered, and he asked it small. May I? He meant the chair. He meant the table. He meant the 10 years and the river, and the 6 silent months, all of it folded into 2 words that gave her the door instead of taking it. Vanessa looked at his hand at his side. Then she pulled off one glove, finger by finger, the small scar catching the light, and she reached across the table and took his hand and laid it down flat under hers on the wood. You may, she said. Not because she'd waited, because she chose. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Tell me, K-Fam, have you ever been accused of a betrayal you never committed, while the person who vowed to protect you chose to believe the lie? Have you ever had to disappear, rebuild your whole name, just to be seen as innocent again? And would you let someone back in only after they restored your dignity in public, not because they still wanted you? Mark my words, K-Fam. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, truth, and love, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.